Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar on trends in care economy policies in African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. I'm Holly Lard-Kruger. I'm a managing partner at the Canopy Lab, and I'm delighted to host this webinar. You'll see on the next slide, we have a few house rules that we'll cover quickly. Please be sure to mute your microphones and know that the session is recorded. We welcome your questions for our speakers, and there's a Q&A function in this webinar so that you can put your questions right in there, and we'll address them at the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. I also want to let you know that there is French translation going on, so you're able to join the French translation if it's needed. So as many of you know, the objective of this webinar is to raise awareness on the importance of care economy policies, and particularly those related to childcare and parental support. We will explore the challenges faced by governments and business associations in implementing responsive policies, especially in the ACP region. Throughout this event, we will highlight the link between care economy policies and their impact on the business enabling environment. I would now like to hand things over to Mr. Anthony Brand, the MSME expert from the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, and Ms. Joanna Caluto, Policy Officer at DG INPA at the European Commission, to make opening remarks. Over to you.
Should I start, Holly?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Brussels. I'm Joanna Cahiloto. I'm from the European Commission. I'm from the Department on International Partnerships and from the team working on investment climate, trade, entrepreneurship, and value chains. And I'm the lucky one in our team working on the file on women's economic empowerment. As part of this, I also co-manage from the EU side the ICR facility together with my colleague Miguel, who is here as well today. So we at the European Commission, we take the commitment on women's economic empowerment very seriously, and we consider women's economic empowerment as a central part of all of our work. This is also in line with the EU Gender Action Plan, which actually mandates that 85% of all of the EU external action has some objectives on gender equality, so quite a strong commitment from the EU side. And this is also why we are extremely happy and proud of the ICR facility's strong commitment on women's economic empowerment. This also brings me to the topic of today on creating an enabling environment for women's economic participation. As we know, there are still many structural barriers ranging from regulatory barriers, discriminatory policies, practices that prohibit or may prohibit women's full participation in the economy. And as we also know, functioning care economy is also an essential part of this equation. So today we will hear a lot of interesting statistics and interesting findings that we found with the ICReport on care economy. But let me already give you a brief spoilers and mention that in 2024, so today, women are still doing a bulk of all of the care work and unpaid work. And this ranges globally from 2 to 10 times more than men. 2 to 10 times more than men. So this, of course, comes with a cost on women's economic participation. And that's also why internationally, globally, care economy is one of the key topics on women's economic empowerment, and increasingly so. So we see this in all of the international discussions on women's economic empowerment. And actually, this really makes sense. I mean, we cannot expect women entrepreneurs to have success, or for women's labor force participation to improve unless the business environment allows for this, or actually better yet, if the business environment supports this participation. So let me finish the opening remarks from my side by expressing our gratitude to all of the esteemed speakers that we have here today, and a special thanks for Her Excellency, the Minister of Gender and Children's Affairs of Sierra Leone, as well as Miss Director of Department of Gender of St. Lucia for their presence here today. So thank you very much. And thank you also for the BMZ and OACPS for always good cooperation on women's economic empowerment. And finally, we are, of course, truly happy to have all of you here to join the discussion. So thank you from our side, and I hand over to Anthony from the OACPS. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Honorable Minister Isato Mahoy, my colleagues Miguel and Joanna from the European Commission, implementation partners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Anthony Brand of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, Department of Structural Economic Transformation and Trade, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of this important report on the critical role of care policies in supporting the economic development of OACPS and developing nations. As we know, the OACPS represents some of the world's most vibrant yet economically vulnerable regions. A key challenge facing many of our member states is how to harness the potential of their young and growing populations to drive sustainable progress. This is where care policies encompassing childcare, eldercare, and support for persons with disabilities become absolutely vital. Investing in accessible and affordable care infrastructure does far more than just provide social protection. It enables greater labor force participation, particularly for women, bolstering productivity and incomes across the economy. Moreover, quality care services lay the foundation for human capital development, ensuring our children grow up healthy, nourished, and equipped with the skills to thrive in the 21st century workforce. This intergenerational impact is crucial for breaking cycles of poverty and inequality, which unfortunately plague many of the member countries of the ACP. In an era of rapid demographic shifts, care policies also help OACPS nations manage the economic implications of aging populations. They are a key pillar of inclusive, resilient growth. Recently, I was in Zambia attending the Artisanal Mining Forum, hosted as part of the OACPS EU Development Minerals Mining Program. There, I met Mrs. Kengu, who is known locally as the Mother of Mines for her more than 40 years participation in the artisanal mining sector. Women make up more than 40% of active participants in this sector, and I can imagine that many of the issues and solutions which we will discuss here today would positively impact not only the ASM, but also many productive sectors in which women are the majority across OACPS nations. Developing synergies between the roughly 21 private sector development programs which we manage at the OACPS Department of Structural Economic Transformation and Trade is of great importance to us. And this is why I would like to publicly thank the ICR facility for being able to invite Mrs. Kengu to attend and share her experiences at the upcoming Women's Economic Empowerment Conference that will be held in Rwanda during the first week of June. Colleagues, the evidence is clear. Strategic care policies must be at the heart of our economic planning and policy making. I'm confident that the report which we will hear today will provide invaluable insights to guide us through the formation of this critical agenda. On behalf of the OACPS, I extend my thanks to our development partners at the European Union, the ICR facility team, Ms. Holly Kruger of the Canopy Lab, and especially Dr. Rouhani for producing and developing this report. And of course, look forward to interesting discussions. Thank you.
Thank you both for that important framing for our conversation today. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Leva Rouhani. She is an affiliate consultant at the Canopy Lab and the lead writer of the ICR report on business environment reforms and the care economy. Dr. Rouhani, over to you to share your insights and recommendations.
Good morning, everyone. What an honor to be part of this diverse panel and speaking on such an important issue. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Leva Rouhani, and I'm the principal author of this report. Now, the purpose of writing this report was really to showcase how countries in Africa, in the Caribbean, and in the Pacific have been using innovative ways to reform childcare policies and parental leave provisions to create this more conducive business environment. Next slide, please. So how did we go about generating the findings for this report? Well, we conducted a literature review to really just capture what is going on in the field, what is going on across the landscape. We were able to gather 63 different entries of relevant and recent data, so from 2018 and onwards, of the different policies and best practices that were happening in the ACP region. We then conducted key informant interviews across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, and were able to engage with 38 stakeholders at different levels working across the care economy landscape. We did a case study analysis where we were able to really dive deeper into specific best practices and even challenges that were happening across the countries, and then validated these case studies with the associated key stakeholder to ensure that we were not interpreting things out of context. Now, I'll spend the next couple of minutes of my time discussing what did we actually find in this report before passing it on to our excellent selection of panelists. Next slide, please. So care work heavily impacts women's economic empowerment. Across the globe, care work sustains societies and economies by providing essential services for households, for children, for the elderly, for the sick, for people with disabilities. And as you may know, the care economy consists of both paid and unpaid labor and services that support caregiving in all its form. So key stakeholders within this sector include a variety of stakeholders. You have those that produce and distribute care, both paid and unpaid. You have those that facilitate the care provision through infrastructure, technology, services, and policies. And so this includes families and households, but also the state, the private sector, and civil society organizations. Next slide, please. What the report, actually, sorry, let's stay on this slide. But what the report highlighted is that the care economy and care policies are really an integral part of a conducive business environment. They can be gender transformative. They can enable women to have better access to quality jobs, resources, capacities, entrepreneurship. And this is the case from two perspectives. First, from the formal care economy sector, which is predominantly female, sectoral reforms have had benefits for women. And second is care policies that make qualitative improvements, which is the first place women benefit. And these include reducing the time and resources they allocate to unpaid care work and reallocating them to other activities, such as establishing a business, entering the formal labor market, or engaging in training to improve their skills. Next slide, please. Now, care policies are a subsector of business environment policies within a broader domain of gender equality policies. They cut across different sectors such as labor, business, health, education, and social relations. For care policies to be an integral part of an attractive business and investment climate in the ACP countries, in which both employers and employees have access to the largest possible pool. And what we found is that they really must address the accessibility, availability, and quality of public and private care services. And for these policies to succeed, they must first challenge social norms on care work and duties that affect women disproportionately. Research has found that countries that introduce care policies to close this gender employment gap stand to increase their GDP by 20%. Our report also found the cross-cutting nature of care policies, and this requires cross-sectoral, cross-ministerial, and multi-stakeholder approach. When the care economy fits within just one ministry, and this is often the Ministry of Women and Gender, or the Ministry of Labor, or the Ministry of Economy, the actor leading this file must ensure that a good level of consultation and coordination with other relevant stakeholders or public and private dialogue format to enhance the impact of these care policies. So what we have found in our report is that when that one ministry that is leading the file is engaging with private sector representative organizations, when they're engaging with other ministries, when they're engaging with women's business associations, care worker associations, and they are coordinating between local and national level decision-making, is when you see the best results in implementation. As highlighted in the case studies from the report, public investments in care policies and the subsequent drafting of laws to support this sector takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. It requires, dedication in budgeting. It requires the specific capacities for public and private actors. It requires campaigns to shift social and gender norms, and it requires that the infrastructure in country is there to support these changes. And so although it does take time, what we have found is that the interest in the care economy is on the rise. We're seeing more and more senior level buy-in in terms of the importance of the care economy for the business environment and for society as a whole. We're seeing an increasing acknowledgement of the key part it plays in enhancing sustainable and inclusive economies. And so we're seeing that dedication to understanding that it does take time. Next slide, please. Our report found that governments in the ACP region are expanding access to public childcare services through the promotion of diverse types of care provision. So the evidence to date shows that this diversity of means and providers is currently really crucial to meet the needs of families, as well as for bringing in additional care businesses, additional care workers, and investments in the childcare sector. In the ACP region, governments are expanding access to childcare through four main approaches. So we have direct government provision of childcare. We have financial support to families through subsidies. We have incentives for non-state provisions. So for example, community-based models. And we see mandates or incentives for employer-supported childcare as different types of approaches that governments are taking. Next slide, please. And so I've been told I only have 2 minutes. I'll go quite quickly. What we're seeing also is that the redistribution of, we're seeing that current legislation, we're seeing the promotion of this need for the paternity side of things. So increasing this norms around, fathers also being included in when we're looking at care policy. So we're not just looking at maternity leave, we're looking at parental leave. And we're looking at paternity leave. And what we found is that although in a lot of countries, there are laws around paternity leave, even if it's for a couple days, organizations are not, the norms haven't changed. They're still seen as feminine duties or women's duties, and therefore men are not taking. So even though they're entitled to these care policies, they're not taking these parental leaves. What we also found is that currently legislation and policies relating to maternity and paternity leave in ACP states only account for the period right immediately after birth. So whether it be a couple weeks after birth or up to 6 months after birth. But this means there's a gap of approximately 4.2 years from when most leave entitlements come to an end and the age before that children start school that is unaccounted for. And the lack of care policy entitlements for this full period is actually then delegating tasks to women or family paid care solutions, or again, expectation of unpaid care work. Parental leave is often available to either parents, but not to both parents. And so, like I mentioned, it's often then the mother that takes the parental leave and not both because of gender norms. And next slide, please. I'm going to just briefly end with some conclusions and moving forward. And if you have more questions, feel free to dive deeper into the report. But also to throw in your questions in the chat box. So in the report, we recommend focusing on 4 mutually reinforcing areas: developing and implementing a tailored childcare and parental regulatory framework that is aligned with international standards by means of a public-private dialogue approach and this cross-ministerial approach; mainstream the collection of sex disaggregated data on childcare responsibilities. So data is super important to be able to advance the types of policies that we need that are relevant to key stakeholders, and assessing the impact of pilots or newly introduced policies at individual, national levels that can inform public-private dialogues and help develop, like I mentioned, this evidence-based policies. The last 2 is focus on boosting public and private investments in the childcare sector through vocational professional trainings, adapted infrastructures, new businesses to make available, affordable, and quality childcare this kind of concrete reality. And last is this piece around gender norms and creating gender norms awareness campaigns to accompany social behavioral change for more quality and really just, again, shifting the perceptions that we have. Our great speakers are going to actually touch on each one of these aspects and how they've been able to incorporate them, what were some challenges in incorporating these different areas. So I'll pass the floor on to our excellent speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rani. Your presentation highlighted the key takeaways from our research. And before introducing our next speaker, I want to take this opportunity to encourage all of you who are attending this webinar to download the report. You'll see links to it in the chat at the end of this webinar. As Leva said, there's really a rich amount of research in there and useful case studies. I would now like to take the opportunity to introduce Hannelore Neaston. She is an extended term consultant with the Women, Business, and the Law at the World Bank. She will present on their most recent research. Over to you, Ms. Neaston.
Thank you, Holly. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It is wonderful to present Women, Business, and the Law research on childcare, which is actually like Women, Business, and the Law measures laws and policies impacting women's economic empowerment in 190 economies, not only childcare, several other indicators, but I will be focusing on childcare. So as the next slide indicates, I will present very briefly the main finding of this report and explaining the new childcare indicator with a focus on regulations in the Asia-Pacific regions and ways forward for closing legal gaps. Next slide, please. So over the last 15 years, Women, Business and Law has analyzed laws affecting women's lives around the world with one goal: to measure how laws, or the lack actually in many countries, affect women's economic empowerment and opportunities. Starting with the first report in 2010, and since then publishing annual reports on women's female labor force participation. The next slide indicates the new legal framework as measured by Women, Business and Law, but paints a more accurate picture of the challenges and opportunities experienced by women as they go through their lives. So these are the 10 indicators. This year, we added the safety indicator, focusing on domestic violence and childcare. Now we'll be focusing on childcare. And as the next slide indicates, it's my first real slide. I'm particularly excited about the importance of access to affordable and higher quality childcare, given that women spend on average 2.4 hours a day more on unpaid care work than men. Much of it is involving children. So the next slide shows actually 3 different areas where Women, Business and the Law focus with regards to analyzing childcare frameworks. It's a legal framework, it's a supportive framework, and it's also expert opinions. I will focus on the 3 areas as of now. So as the next slide indicates, it's about the childcare legal framework. It measures accessibility, affordability, and quality of childcare. And each country is actually scored on a scale from 0 to 100, with 100 representing the highest possible score. We measure the laws for 190 economies worldwide, and we focus for childcare on children between 0 and 2 years and 11 months, because we see that most gaps are located for the youngest children. The childcare legal framework indicator is actually the 3rd lowest indicator across all the 10 Women, Business and the Law indicators, with the overall global score of 47.6, indicating that the world is not even halfway there when it comes to the creation of the enabling environment for the provision, public finance, and quality of childcare services. Next slide, please. This actually indicates all the different scores. What we see actually that the Asia-Pacific region is scoring less than the global score. So it means that Asia-Pacific region has more gaps in public finance support mechanism in availability, but also the quality of childcare services. So as a result of this, women may think twice about going to work while they have children in their care, because as we know, the quality of provided care and affordability can serve as an important determining factor for parental enrollment decisions of their kids. As the next slide indicates, we construct these indicators for each of the 10 indicators based on strong empirical backing. So the childcare indicator took us more than 10 years to really construct these data. And finally, in March this year, we published the report, and all the data is online on the Women, Business and the Law website. We reviewed a lot of literature to find strong evidence for each of the questions and the responses. Next slide, please. So This slide actually shows that both the South Asia region and the East Asia and the Pacific region score less than the global average on legal frameworks for childcare. And when compared to the global score, the score is more than half as low on average for South Asia, with quite a bit of variation in the progress made within the region. And OECD economies generally score the highest in terms of legal frameworks. So next slide, please. Because the previous slide, I focused on legal frameworks, but we also did research on the supportive frameworks, not the legislation or regulation, but how easy or difficult is it for a parent to apply for financial support, like application forms on the website, also for providers, a list of all the providers, if that could be found on the community website or the website of the main business center. What we see here is that the childcare supportive frameworks reveal a shocking gap where the implementation challenges is not just one region or one country specific issue. This is actually a global issue where most of the world continues to face substantial implementation challenges. Out of the 10 indicators covered by the Women, Business and Law, the childcare indicator is the third lowest scoring indicator regarding the availability of frameworks supporting the implementation of childcare laws, with a very global, low global average of 30 out of 100. This means that not even a third of supportive frameworks on childcare, as measured by the Women, Business and Law, have been put in place. And most of the world, except for OECD countries again, and Europe and Central Asia fall behind the global average, including East Asia and the Pacific and South Asia. So next slide, please. Because this summarizes the breakdown. Again, I refer to the website if you want to read every detail behind the scoring, but just to note that the quality is scoring very low, especially for Asia Pacific region. So any reports on the quality of childcare services has only been published by 9% of the Asia Pacific economies. And the next slide indicates actually the expert opinion. So we asked a lot of experts all over the world and also in Asia Pacific region if women have access to affordable and high quality childcare. And we see a very low score. Less than 1 out of 3 women have access to affordable and quality childcare. Even very low in South Asia, even less than 1 out of 4. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide, which actually indicates that change is possible. So although it's a difficult time for any country to reform, the childcare reform has been gaining momentum, with the childcare being given the legal and policy recognition and status it deserves. So including relatively recently countries across the Asia Pacific region. For example, Mongolia implemented support to providers, Vietnam increased the access to families through the legal frameworks, and Indonesia also provided financial support to providers. And so the next slide, actually, I cannot close my session without thanking all the Women, Business and the Law contributors, because we rely actually on you to help us completing data gaps. So thank you very much, and looking forward to further discussions during this session.
Thank you so much, Ms. Houston, for that deep dive into childcare. It was so rich with data. Thank you. I now have the honor to introduce our next speaker, Minister Issata Mahoy. She is the Minister of Gender and Children's Affairs in Sierra Leone. She will give a special address on maternal and paternal leave policies and their impact on the business environment in Sierra Leone. Minister Mahoy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Holly, and greetings, colleagues from the European Union and GIZ. Moderator, distinguished panelists, participants, I bring you greetings from His Excellency, the President, Dr. Julius Maada Bio, the government and people of the Republic of Sierra Leone. Our country is a patriarchal society, but we are making remarkable progress to address discriminatory practices against women while creating the enabling policy and legal environment of women's emancipation to thrive. Women form about 52% of the total population of Sierra Leone, which suggests that there can be no sustainable development if this critical mass of the population is sidelined. Majority of the population of women are found in the informal sector, ranging from agriculture, commerce, and trade. The government of Sierra Leone has taken measures through sound policies and legislations to promote positive women's workforce participation, either in the informal or formal work environment. These reforms have helped increase the number of females in political and administrative leaderships in Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone now have at least 30% females as cabinet ministers, 33% as deputy ministers. At least the percentage of female as members of parliament are over 30% and are also the councillors. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my submission will zoom in on the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act of 2022 and the Employment Act of 2023. Both laws provide the enabling environment to provide care, enhance women's participation in the labor force. Section 15 of the Employment Act of 2023 prohibits violence and harassment, including sexual harassment in the workplace, and prescribes mechanism for redress. Section 17 of the Employment Act of 2023 prohibits discrimination in employment or occupation, and a person discriminated against may make a complaint by himself or by another person on his or her behalf. Section 17(2) states that an employer shall not dismiss an injured worker, discriminate against or disadvantage a worker in respect of the worker's employment or occupation, or alter the worker's position on the detriment of the worker by reason only that the worker is pregnant or experiencing a maternity condition. Section 4 of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act 2022 mandates the following. A designated public or private employer shall have at least 30% of women in his employment. An employer shall, in addition to his responsibility to employ at least 30% of women under subsection 1, that ensures that at least 30% of his employment in the decision-making position at all levels within their organization. An employer shall prohibit discrimination in employment against women and prohibit dismissal as a result of pregnancy. An employer shall ensure the prohibit sexual harassment in accordance with the Sexual Offences Act. An employer shall ensure paid maternity leave for at least 14 weeks to women. Section 18(1) of the Employment Act of 2023 mandates all employers to pay equal remuneration for men and women workers for work of equal value, and for that purpose, an employer shall conduct a job evaluation to ensure that the principle of equal remuneration for men and women workers for work of equal value is applied. Section 5 of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act mandates employers to ensure equal remuneration for persons of equal skills, competence, expertise, and knowledge without discrimination of any kind. Section 72(1) of the Employment Act of 2023 states that upon presentation of a medical certificate issued by a certified medical practitioner or a midwife certifying the expected date of delivery or the actual date of delivery, as the case may be, a female worker shall be entitled to not less than 14 weeks maternity leave in accordance with this act, any other enactment, contract, or collective agreements on full remuneration. This is just to explain to you how the laws have been harmonized in terms of trying to protect women when they are ready for maternity leave. This has not been happening before, and we are only implementing what the law says at this particular moment. During the period when a female worker is on maternity leave in accordance with subsection 1, our normal benefits and entitlements, including our contractual rights and the accumulation of pension rights, as well as our legitimate expectation to advancement and seniority, shall continue uninterrupted in the manner in which they would have been had she had not gone on such leave, and a period of employment shall not be considered to have been interrupted, reduced, or broken by the exercise of a right to maternity leave. This was not the case initially. So with these laws and the legal framework that has been there, this is now what is happening. Because once a woman got pregnant and also going towards maternity leave, then they will be dismissed. So this was the case. And now we are making a case here that with the laws, the advent of these laws, these things are changing now. Women are actually receiving the normal leave. It was initially 12 weeks, but now 14 weeks, and also receiving the actual pay. A female worker shall have right to return to the job which she had immediately prior to her maternity leave, and on terms and conditions not less favorable than those which would have applied had she not been absent, unless that job has ceased to exist because of economic, technological, or organizational reasons. The burden to prove that reasons for termination or dismissal are related to pregnancy or childbirth and its consequence on nursing under subsection 4 shall rest with the employer. In either of the circumstances under paragraphs A or B of subsection 4, the employer shall take responsible or reasonable steps to find the female worker a suitable alternative job within the workplace, and where a suitable alternative job cannot be found, or if the female worker unreasonably refuses the offer of a job, the employer shall be entitled to terminate her employment with notice in writing, if the employer so requests, subject to providing severance pay under section 80 and to the requirements of redundancy compensation under section 82 and disciplinary penalties under section 83. Where sickness arising out of pregnancy or during confinement affecting either mother or a baby and making the mother's return to work inadvisable, the right to return under subsection 4 shall be available within 20 weeks of the date of confinement or miscarriage. A female worker shall be entitled to the rights mentioned in subsection 1 and 3 after giving not less than 7 days advance notice to her employer of her intention to take maternity leave or such shorter period as a reasonable in the circumstances, after giving not less than 7 days notice of her intention to return to work. An employer shall not terminate or dismiss a female worker because of her absence from work on maternity leave. Section 73 of the Employment Act requests for pregnancy test prohibited. An employer shall not request for pregnancy test or a certificate of such a test when female worker is applying for employment, except where required for work that is A, of high risk on the health of the pregnant woman, or B, prohibited to or restricted for pregnancy or nursing women by law. Section 74 speaks on night work. Section 74(1) mandates that a female worker may be employed during the night in the workplace as long as her safety, health, and security is guaranteed and not exposed to dangerous working environment. Unless, with her consent, a female worker shall not be employed on night work during the period of 10 weeks before and 10 weeks after childbirth, or during such additional period before or after childbirth in respect to which a medical certificate is produced by us stating that an additional period is necessary for the health of the mother of the child, and the employer shall, where reasonably practicable, provide a transfer to day work for such a female worker during additional period. A pregnant female worker or mother may present a written complaint of the commissioner against an employer who contravene subsection 1. An employer shall not assign, whether permanently or temporarily, a pregnant worker to a post outside a place of residence after the completion of the 4th month of pregnancy, if the assignment, in the opinion of a medical practitioner or midwife, is detrimental to her health. The pregnant worker may present a written complaint to the commissioner against an employer who contravenes subsection 1. Section 77 of Employment Act grants paternity leave. For the purpose of this act, a male worker shall be entitled to 2 weeks paternity leave upon the birth of his child in accordance with this act, any other enactment, contract, or collective agreement. Upon the birth of his child, a male worker shall give 1 week written notice to his employer of his intention to proceed to paternity leave. Notwithstanding subsection 1 and 2, a male worker shall not be entitled to more than 1 paternity leave per year. And you know the reason why this is being said so, because of course, then they take into consideration that some men will have multiple women and have multiple pregnant women at the same time. But of course, you have to give account of your wife or the woman that you have already registered in the policies as agreed by your employer. So this is the reason. And also, an employer may require the certificates referred to in paragraph A, subsection 2, be obtained from registered medical practitioner or personnel nominated by him, provided that in such a case, the employer shall be responsible for any fees and transport costs payable in connection with the issuing of certificates. The government of Sierra Leone has developed and launched the Medium-Term National Development Plan 2024 to 2030. And it is fully aligned with the SDGs and the Agenda 2063. Gender is mainstreamed in the entire document. And also, gender mainstreaming is one of the enablers in the implementation of the plan. It is envisaged that of the 500,000 jobs that will be created by government and the private sector, at least 30% of them will be given to women. Since we have a lot of women in the informal sector, and mainly agriculture, the government of Sierra Leone passed into law the Customary Land Rights Bill 2022, which has a whole section on gender equality and gives women the right to own and dispose of land in the country. With the government of Sierra Leone flagship agenda, the Feed Sierra Leone, in high gear, women will immensely contribute to food security as the work environment is now very friendly. Let me conclude my remarks by thanking GIZ for creating the opportunity for Sierra Leone to share a story at the global stage. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Minister Mahoy, for giving us insights into how Sierra Leone is implementing laws and policies that directly contribute to women's economic empowerment and an improved business enabling environment. I think our audience really appreciates the time that you took to walk us through what these policies actually look like on the books and how they are so game-changing. So thank you again. We're now going to change up the format and have a panel discussion with Ms. Janie Joseph, the Director of the Department of Gender Relations in St. Lucia, and Mr. Isaiah Imaya, the founder and CEO of Uthabiti Africa and convener for the Collaborative Action for Childcare Kenya. This first question is for you, Mr. Imaya. Could you tell me more about your work on care policies? What are you working on and when did you get started?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in the presence of such eminent personalities. The Collaborative Action for Childcare was initially a project that started 5 years ago to accelerate quality, affordable childcare in Kenya. And we started by specifically deciding that we were going to collaborate with multiple actors in order to achieve change in a faster way, by also recognizing that childcare in Africa is a crisis, and is in crisis because not many governments are doing much to invest in it or to develop policies And therefore, we didn't have a lot of time to go into lengthy policy development processes. So we started testing our approach in Kenya, and the approach was the sort of hypothesis was that it is possible to develop very practical policies within the shortest time possible, and these policies will particularly protect women working within the childcare ecosystem. So we are doing that in county governments, because counties childcare in Kenya is devolved, and we are doing that with county governments to ensure that these county governments have policies and regulations that are protective of women and that enable women that enable women to work, whether they are caregivers or mothers who need childcare to go to work. We are also we are engaged at national level also to influence care policies. As you may know, Kenya right now is on the verge of finalizing a national care policy. We're involved in ensuring that passes and to protect childcare workers and also other workers within the care economy and contributes to reducing the burden of care on women. We are also producing data. Our report on the status of women female childcare workers in Kenya 2023 was really critical in advancing action on childcare within Kenya, and we are scaling this work to Malawi, where we also be testing national policy and regulatory reform in a collaborative manner. And we're also working with other actors to ensure that this also happens in Ghana. So our platform is really looking at how we can scale up childcare policy reform in the fastest way possible, and by bringing together government and non-state actors to ensure this happens as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for really highlighting the importance of the immediacy of this work, or the real urgency of this work, considering the long time frames it takes to develop care policies. Ms. Joseph, this next question is for you. St. Lucia is in the early stages of evaluating the potential of care policies, looking at budgetary implications and potential impact on women's labor force participation, among other aspects. Could you tell us more about why you started this process and where you are currently?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this highly important forum. In the last few years, St. Lucia has been paying greater attention to entrepreneurship and business development as a path to economic growth. And at the same time, the island is also placing greater emphasis on ensuring gender equality outcomes in national development. So we have gender focal points in the public sector. As a result, there is more gender sensitivity in national development planning. St. Lucia at the same time is also participating in the regional discussions around institutional barriers that hinder women's full participation in the labor force. And one of those factors is unpaid care and domestic work. COVID-19 made it impossible to ignore the impact of the care burden on women's economic empowerment. And during the pandemic, the greatest cuts in employment came from the sectors dominated by women. Women's role as caregivers conflicted with their productive role. Many micro and small businesses owned by women were forced to close down, and re-entry into the world of work was slow, and in some cases impossible for many women, because they had to stay home to care for their children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. And that was not the case for men. Men lost their jobs on a smaller scale when compared to women, and they returned to work easier because care roles did not bar their re-entry into the world of work. The Buenos Aires Commitment, which was the outcome document of the Regional Conference on Women in Latin America and the Caribbean in 2022, highlighted this reality, and it called on regional governments to implement care policies to accelerate national sustainable development with equality. We were fortunate also to have benefited from ongoing work by UN Women on social protection through a project of the Joint SDG Fund in St. Lucia. Gender trends and data and information gaps in the care economy were highlighted through this work. And we have come to the agreement in St. Lucia that these gaps must be urgently addressed through legislative and policy strengthening. As you pointed out earlier, we explored the island's capacity to introduce comprehensive childcare services And it is estimated that to introduce a public comprehensive childcare system, St. Lucia will have to invest approximately 7% of its GDP, and to further invest up to 2% annually to sustain it. Another development in the region was the drafting of the Inter-American Commission Model Law on Care, which we have noticed includes some of the very aspects that we need to strengthen legislation and policy in St. Lucia. We therefore consider this an opportune time to explore sensitization on care that will lead to the policy and legislative development. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's great that you highlight kind of the starting of this was really around COVID, and I think that was such an inflection point for many of us who work as advocates for the care economy. This next question is for Mr. Amaya. Your organization works with national and local governments to advocate for childcare policies. Could you tell us more about your engagement with the government, and what is your advice for productive collaboration?
So thank you once more. Our collaboration with government was premised on one fundamental issue, government being in the lead. And so when we started our work, I remember having the county government of Nairobi being part of our very first sort of partners in the country. And then we got the Ministry of Education involved. As we implemented our work, we established the Collaborative Action for Childcare. And under this, we developed a National Childcare Policies and Regulations Technical Working Group. And this technical working groups involves both government and state actors. Through this technical working group, we've been able to achieve very practical policy changes at county level, which is the center, the place where practical action on childcare takes place. As I speak, we've Nairobi County, which is our biggest metropolis in Kenya, is just about to finalize regulations that will enable over 10,000 childcare micro-enterprises run by women and which are used by many working women to achieve, to actually improve their socioeconomic status. So that is replicated in a number of counties where we are working. We've also been part of the panel that has been working with the Ministry of Gender in Kenya to develop the national care policy. And as we go on over the next 7 years, we will now be delving into supporting government to work on the other policies that affect women, whether they're agricultural policies, financial policies, and taxation policies and all that, because ultimately we are looking at childcare, at transforming the childcare ecosystem, and it's not possible to do that without actually ensuring that every policy that government develops is taking into consideration the childcare interests of women. We are also looking at ensuring that the 8% of men within the childcare ecosystem, as our research is showing, increases over time, because again that means that men become more involved in addressing the childcare crisis, and also begin ultimately to transform the social and gender norms. So we are looking at the policy and regulatory environment very, very widely. That every policy, every government, every institution that employs women, or any sector that employs women must start thinking about childcare. So it can start with government policies, but ultimately it also has to focus on organizational policies and how those enable women to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amaya. I love how you bring together this idea around the importance of national policy and setting that framework. And I think we heard that very clearly in Mr. Mahoy's address, but also the importance of ensuring that those laws and policies are implemented at the ground level. And as you mentioned, the county being so critical here in Kenya. I think that's an interesting kind of way to think about the importance of both working nationally and locally to ensure that these laws are translated into action on the ground. And I think that really, I picked up on that as well in the presentation by Ms. Neaston from Women, Business, and the Law, kind of, making sure that there's a connection between policy and the practice. My next question is for you, Ms. Joseph, picking up on this idea of collaboration. You are also working in a collaborative manner to advance your work. Could you talk about your collaboration with other ministries on this topic?
Thanks again for that question. The Gender Affairs Division is not in this alone. Partnership is very important to all gender equality work, and collaboration for us is both external and internal. In the region, we collaborate with development agencies and friendly governments. On the national level, we collaborate with ministries, departments, and agencies of government, as well as civil society and the private sector. St. Lucia is one of 4 participating countries in the Build Back Equal project implemented by UN Women and UNFPA and funded by the Canadian government. That project builds on the work undertaken by UN Women on social protection. Through this project, St. Lucia will be in a position to produce a small amount of time use data within the context of the labor force survey. It also provides legal expertise for the development of a care policy and drafting of model legislation on various aspects of care, including paternity and maternity leave, childcare, elderly care, care for persons with disabilities, among others. We are benefiting also from collaboration with Pan-Americas, UN Women, SIM, and now ICR and its partners. National collaboration started between the Division of Gender Affairs and the Office of the Prime Minister. Other governmental agencies, such as the Ministry of Equity, Social Justice and Empowerment, and the Central Statistical Office have been added to the team, which is now being pursued as a national interagency task force on care. We meet once a week to identify priorities, pursue some low-hanging fruits, and discuss priorities and challenges. And we also meet to identify sources of support. We are currently moving to formalize the working group and include some additional departments, such as the Department of Commerce, Finance, Labor, Public Service, Health, the Attorney General's Chambers, and the Chamber of Commerce. The working group will be jointly chaired by the Office of the Prime Minister and the Division of Gender Affairs. And to the extent possible, the members will include focal points from the various ministries that they're representing. So far, the working group is consolidating information from various sources and identifying priorities. The working group has prioritized public education and sensitization on care through the development of a behavior change communication strategy that focuses on eliminating harmful gender norms and stereotypes, like we heard a little earlier on, because these perpetuate gender inequality. And the working group supported the development of this presentation, and moving forward, we will support national conversation around care. We're right now learning, and so we are very open to learning from the experiences of others in the various sectors. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Joseph. You mentioned you're talking about the way that you're really approaching this as an interagency challenge and opportunity. I think came out clearly in the ICR report on the care economy policies. The real need to approach this to recognize that care is not a gender issue. It is a macroeconomic issue that requires the support of across the government. This last question is for both of you. I'll pose it to Mr. Amaya first. What was the most important lessons learned to date in your work, and what advice do you have for the policymakers that are on this webinar with us about how to approach this topic? Mr. Amaya, over to you first.
Thank you so much. I think the first thing is recognizing the power of collaboration. In Kenya, as a small startup, we have achieved a lot over the last couple of years through collaboration. Our principle is to ensure that we co-design every initiative we are working on and ensure that we bring as many actors to the table as possible. Even if we don't agree on certain things, we feel the issue of childcare is too important to be left to one person and to be left also to the challenges sometimes of collaboration. So that is key. The second bit is, of course, government in the lead. For us, we really believe that when it comes to childcare, the age of criticizing government and telling them they don't know what to do has passed. I think it is about sitting together and ensuring that we develop the practical solutions that children and their caregivers so urgently need. The third bit is really recognizing and that childcare is an integral part of women's economic empowerment, and that the bringing in that women's rights organizations, businesses, and everyone needs to be involved. And as we have agreed during this session, it has to involve local and public sector engagement at local and national level. And therefore, for us, we as the Collaborative Action for Childcare, a Pan-African platform that is looking at this, we're really looking at partnerships that can accelerate this issue, so that we don't spend another 10 years or 20 years still talking about the same issue. Our collaborative is really around practical action. I think the final thing I can say is funding. We benefited a lot from smart funders who recognized that we had an idea, and that idea could work, and it has worked. I think we need more of that funding now to actually ensure that implementation of the policies that are being developed actually happens, and that our monitoring and evaluation begins to check the direct benefits to caregivers, the direct benefits for the wider population of women workers, both in private and public spaces. But also, I think most importantly for me is that Africa should offer a better foundation for its children, and right now that's not happening, and it's happening on the back of marginalized women, and that's not acceptable. So more investment is required to build on the momentum that in institutions such as the Collaborative are building across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amaya. Over to you, Ms. Joseph. What is the most important lesson learned to date, and what advice do you have for policymakers?
Well, as I indicated earlier, we are still in the initial stages of the process, but we have learned some lessons. Firstly, we must recognize that change isn't that easy, because people prefer to remain in their comfort zone even after a while, even after we have noticed that, safe is no longer safe. So we need to manage change. It is very important to treat the development of care policies as a game changer, a paradigm shift, something that has the potential to change everything. So public sensitization and education is considered a critical first step. This will allow us to understand the realities of the people and foster greater participation in the policy articulation. The second lesson that we've learned is how collaboration really is the key. No one agency can do this work alone, and each agency has its mandates and its expertise, and we can gain from each other's perspectives or their competitive advantage to ensure that we tackle the issue on several fronts. All right, tied very closely with the collaboration idea is the need to be strategic about who is in the room, ensuring that the stakeholders that are involved are in the process from the very start to develop interest and passion in the cause. Because we're talking about change, buy-in is a critical component of this process, and buy-in from the stakeholders who have to implement and enforce the policy is top priority. The third thing is monitoring and evaluation. We think that it must be taken into consideration at the very start of the planning process, so that it is clear what we are monitoring, how often we are monitoring, what indicators we use to guide our monitoring, how and to whom we're reporting or communicating our findings, and what we do with our findings. Because all of these factors we consider must be taken into consideration at the very start of the process, right? At the base of this is data. So putting mechanisms to capture data should be a priority. We should start at this for baseline analysis, because it paints a clearer picture of where we are and what our priorities should really be, and what should our entry points really be. So that's what we've learned so far. And I'm sure there's so much more to learn, because like I indicated, we're still just starting this process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for both Ms. Joseph and Mr. Amaya for sharing your respective experiences. And I think that last point you made on data will resonate with a lot of people on this call. I'm now going to open it up to our Q&A. I appreciate all of you who've already submitted questions. I encourage you to submit more questions if you have them. There's no question too small. We recognize that most of us, actually from our research, discovered that most countries are actually at the very early stages of exploring this, similar to what is happening in St. Lucia. So no question too small or too big. Please put it into the Q&A function. I recognize there was a lot of passion questions for Minister Mahoy. That's not surprising at all. I'm going to bring her back on to speak to a few of the questions that came on. I think I can maybe frame them two ways. I think there's a question around, the challenges that you have faced in implementing this legal framework. And also a question here around kind of the role of subnational governments and how does that play into implementation. Over to you, Minister Mahoy.
Good afternoon again. Can you come again with your question, please?
Sure. I think that our audience was really eager to understand, what are the challenges that you faced in implementing these two laws? I think there's one question. And then the second question is related to subnational governments and how they played a role in policy implementation.
Okay, so that's the part I did not get. So in relation to the challenges, of course, because this is a very new law, it's very new. So sometimes people cannot come to terms with the existing context, So all they do is implement in the old ways of doing things. But as a result of this law, we as a ministry and other partners that are working together, the constraints have been of how you get employers to be able to come to terms and understand or agree on what is the practicability in the law. Also, another challenge is even within government ministries, because before now, just like I said in my opening, that Sierra Leone is a patriarchal state where it's, things has to do with if what the man says or how the man wants it is how it happens. Even some societies did not think about how to send their girl child to school initially. But thank God things are beginning to change. So it's a bit of a problem because people have to come to terms. So changing the mindset is the biggest challenge. Changing the mindset is the biggest challenge that we have. But however, we are popularizing these laws. We are trying to let everybody understand the implications.
Wonderful. I mean, mindset change is so critical in facilitating this. What is an organizational change process to a large degree. Could you speak at all to the subnational structures or how you may have engaged with local government for the implementation of these policies?
Certainly. So because at local level, we work with the councillors, and also there are what we call the ward committees. In those ward committees, we have a percentage of 50 women, 50% women, 50% men. So trying to push agenda in this makes it a little easier. And also we're using those structures because they are more with the local communities. They relate more with the local people. So this is the structures we're using. And in our capacity building initiatives that we have, we ensure that we include them always when we have initiatives like this. And also this is why as a ministry, we have relaunched what we call the network of women ministers, parliamentarians, and also councillors. This is a structure that brings all women, the political leaders, women together. We discuss, we share ideas also. We interact a lot, and then building the network stronger so that we are able to cascade in our respective constituencies and also our respective communities. We cascade information to them. But like I said, the road is still long. There's a lot more to do in terms of bringing these policies to the local communities. The logistical constraints are already there as well, because also some had to reach communities where if you do not have a vehicle, you cannot reach to them unless you go by motorbikes, sometimes challenging for women to travel. So these are some of the other aspects, the financial constraints and logistical constraints as well. But for individuals, the environment is there and people are willing to work together. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I love how you highlighted this issue around social norms, such as mobility, cultural norms, which may actually impact the way in which women participate or benefit from these care policies. I believe your colleague is nearby, and I was going to ask him a question from his perspective. Mr. Charles Vandy, what are the disparities between men and women in terms of care work, paid and unpaid care, and that they seem to rely a lot on social norms? What do you think it is? Is it something that you can integrate into your work, or how do you integrate social norms into your policy work?
Let me check. Maybe his mic is off. Let me check. Mr. Van is having technical challenges with his network. So I want, maybe you ask somebody else while it comes over.
Yeah. Perfect. Oh, is that you? Okay, I'll go ahead and bring in Dr. Leva Rouhani again, the author of our report on care policies. She was answering a few questions in the chat that was posed by audience members, but I wanted to bring her into the conversation to elaborate on this point, because we know that the study is really rich, and she only had a very limited time to highlight a few of the important takeaways and recommendations. Leva, over to you.
Thanks so much, Holly, and thank you for such great questions. One of the questions that we saw was around whether implementing paternity leave actually then leads to fathers engaging in childcare. So is there's that effect? And like I mentioned in the chat, what we found is that a dual approach needs to be done. So, and I'm sure the previous speaker will speak to this as well, as this piece around social norms is critical, and that's why care policies take time. You have to change social norms at different levels, right? You have to change them institutionally, you have to change them within the family, you have to change them within government to really take on and understand that care work is everybody's work. It's not just women's work, it's not just men's work, but it's everybody's work. And so when that change happens at so many levels is when you'll be able to implement a policy that will then actually lead to the benefit. So it's not just implementing a policy and then hoping that they will, but really taking that dual approach is what we found has been successful, and again takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And there was this question also around if I may, but I also see Charles Vandy here, so I'll just briefly go into this question that Clara was asking around what are some barriers to adopting care policies. And we see them, like I mentioned, like Holly mentioned, that we're at such a nascent kind of period of implementing care policies. We're at a period where we're gathering data on the importance, but again, it's quite early days, as we like to say it. And so there are still quite a bit of barriers in being able to implement it institutionally. There is the cost associated, and this is, like I mentioned, both perceived but actual costs related to implementing care policies. You have the senior level engagement and really seeing the benefit of implementing care policies. And then you have the ability to measure impact. Like, what does impact look like at an institutional level? So I'll leave it there just to make sure that the internet connection is still working for Charles. And then if we have more time, we'll jump back over to me. Thank you, Holly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Rouhani. Mr. Charles Vandy, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So this is a beautiful question. Looking at the disparities between men and women in terms of care work, whether paid or unpaid. At least Honorable Minister Aissatou Mahoy has presented a context in which talking about patriarchy and looking also in the context where until we break the barriers, we are not going to be able to address this care work, because already it is only now that the evolution of gender awareness is making a lot of inroads into what culturally and traditional norms have been taken into account as to what the woman's role should be and what the male role should be. So in Sierra Leone, we are challenged with a lot of data collection. We hope the upcoming census and the multiple cluster indicator surveys, the DHS and other surveys, will be able to take on board some of these real-time statistics on unpaid care work. Even us educated men, we do not pay our partners on some of the job they are doing, which if others were going to perform those jobs, we were going to pay them for those kind of services. So most times it is not being taken into consideration, even in terms of calculating their contribution to national economy, what women can contribute to national economy, until you really bring real-time data that we suggest that these are the kind of things that women are doing, but they are not being recorded either at household level or even at national level, for them to really show what they are contributing in terms of family, community, and at state level. So for us in Sierra Leone, we are looking forward to the upcoming census for really as a gender ministry, because that is now part of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, to ensure that gender is mainstreamed in all sectorial policies, plans, legislations, and development plans. So whatever we are doing, we are going to influence even the questionnaire and some of the things that are going to form part of the upcoming census, just for us to have time use data, because otherwise we'll just be speaking from positions that are not evidence-based. They will tell you in the gender activity profile that women can work as much as 18 hours. And but then what is that showing in terms of their contribution at family level, in terms of their contribution to national development? These are the missing links that we think we need to be focusing on. And also, we need to begin to look at what really the society, how we can break some of those social norms, barriers at the cultural level. Because once they fix their minds to say, this job is to be performed like domestic chores, are to be performed by women, and the men are not doing anything to contribute to that household development, then becomes a challenge. But real-time data is what we need to address some of these, coupled with a lot of awareness, community engagement, for us to really break some of those social norms in the communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that point that you made around data resonates with many of us on this call. And it's a great bridge to bring back Ms. Hannelore Neaston from Women, Business, and the Law at the World Bank too. I'd like to ask her a question about how she hopes policymakers or care economy advocates really engage with the data that they're putting out there. Hannelore?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. So as a quick recap, One Business and the Law contains data for 190 economies on an annual cycle on different indicators, like from workplace, entrepreneurship, property, assets, pay, and especially with safety indicators and the childcare work. So a lot of different barriers all over the world are collected with regards to women's economic empowerment. And literally, I hope that the data is used and it's not only there on an Excel sheet. It contains so much useful insights, an identification of legal barriers for women. Because it's already like several years, it can help to monitor progress. Policymakers can learn, and I think that's a really important issue or thing, is learn from best practices in countries with how legal frameworks could look like. We also hope that it can help to advocate for legal reforms, regulatory reforms, and also comparison with other countries in the region, but also outside the region. So this data-driven approach enables, in my opinion, very good like informed decisions, and ultimately can advance gender equality and also women's economic empowerment. That's why our team works so hard to collect the data in order to be used. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You know, the importance of data has been a theme throughout this webinar. We've heard from many of the speakers really emphasize the importance of making arguments with evidence. This was also a finding in the ICR report on the care economy policies, just the importance of using data. And thanks to the work of the ICR and Women, Business and the Law, there is increasing quality and quantity of data on care economy, childcare, parental leave, and maternal leave policies. I'm going to hand over things now to my colleague, Maria Tueza. She is the Women's Economic Empowerment Advisor to the ICR for the wrap-up. Mariette?
Thank you very much, Holly. On behalf of the ICR facility, I want to thank all our esteemed speakers for sharing their insights and for their precious time. I want to thank the audience as well for staying with us, asking questions, being very involved in this very important topic. Just a couple more minutes for me. So I want to remind you all that you can read and download our ICReport on business environment reforms and the care economy, looking specifically at childcare and parental leave policies in African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. You have the QR code and the link here, and you can also note that in about a month's time, we will have also a translation of the report into French. Next slide, please. Also, our care policies work doesn't stop here, because following the report, this very webinar, we're also planning an activity which is a peer exchange. So we will have a small cohort of about a dozen representatives from governments, public institutions, but also private sector organizations join us, regardless of where they are in their journey towards implementing care policies, be it at the drafting stage, advocating stage, or already implementing. We plan to have this peer exchange. So if your organization is interested in sending a representative from an African, Caribbean, Pacific countries, you can register your interest by writing to the email address you see on the screen. And finally, next slide, please. I want also to remind you that actually the day-to-day work of the ICR facility is to provide short-term technical assistance to support business environment reforms and women's economic empowerment. So if you are working for a government, a ministry, a public or parastatal institution, or an organization representative of the private sector, and you feel like you could benefit from this expertise and this technical assistance that we provide, I'm happy to tell you that there is still a window of opportunity of 2 months to apply to our technical assistance, because we will close it on the 15th of July 2024. So you can go on our website and check the eligibility criteria, also check the other interventions we've done so far, if that can give you a bit more of an idea of what we're doing. And on that final note, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Holly especially for facilitating this webinar today. Thank you to our esteemed speakers. And we hope we will see you soon in another ICR event.